Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm here with Wally Wallakainen, and as part of our ongoing series to talk about application modernization and some of the approaches you can take and the challenges that organizations can run into when looking at their application portfolio, we're going to talk a little bit today about containerization. And Wally Wallakainen is one of our solution architects here at Prem TSR, and he's going to help us deep dive into this solution. So, Wally, thanks for joining me. And if we could start out just as an immediate question, what are some of the problems that containerization can help solve?
A big one, the monolith, the infrastructure created kind of in an old on a physical system.
So like a legacy monolithic application.
Legacy monolithic application. Containerization is able to break up those monoliths into smaller pieces, smaller, more adaptable pieces, and allows your infrastructure to change underneath your business logic in your application. So you're able to run your application anywhere. You are able to run it on a MacBook. You are able to run it on a server. You are able to run it anywhere you would like. So it is adaptable, and that's one of the best things about containers.
One of the advantages that containerization really brings to the organization then is the ability to start decoupling some ancillary services from that monolith.
Yes. Yeah, a container is one of the most decoupled solutions for application running an application. It is decoupled from just about everything. You need an engine to run it on. Docker is a very popular engine to run these things on, but that Docker engine has been adapted to any platform anywhere. So you're able to chase the best deals, you're able to chase the best hardware, you're able to chase, maybe most importantly, the most secure hardware that you can then run your application on. And you're able to migrate and change and adapt your container to any place you want to go safely and securely and quickly. You're able to spin up your container on a development environment, test it, spin it down again, and no one's any the wiser.
I guess one of the big pieces for containerization then, right? Whether we're talking Docker, Kubernetes, or even custom containers that are out there, it really comes down to portability, the ability to run this workload anywhere at any time.
Yeah, it's amazing where with the kind of global strategy of a lot of these cloud services, you want to actually be able to run your container closer and closer to your clients wherever they are. You can run them in Singapore, you can run them in Thailand, you can run them in Scotland, you can run them in Cancun, Mexico. You can run them anywhere that you want the same exact way. Versus the old-fashioned way of trying to run a server in a server farm in those locations, terrible amount of overhead, versus really having a piece of logic that moves where your clients and your customers are.
And I guess that's actually, you just kind of touched on something that almost in a negative, but one of the cool parts about containers too is that you can still run these on-prem as well, right?
You absolutely can. If you are dealing with a monolith, run your first container right next to your monolith. Run your first piece of logic outside your monolith directly next to it. Lowest network speeds, lowest latency, fewest amount of problems when you run your container right next to your already production and important pieces of hardware. You don't want to goof those up, so you start growing your tree right next to that tree of profitability.
We're, again, perfect segue into the next question I had for you that really plays into the longer term vision for how organizations can get started here. But can you kind of walk us through a start to finish project, right? If you were going in with an organization that had a major monolith that they were trying to uplift, what does that project look like? Where do you start, and where can organizations look to start with this?
What you want to be careful of is if your organization, your business is based around an application that's very safe, very secure, and you have a lot of processes in place, you don't necessarily want to go in and remove all of those processes and change everything all at once. You kind of want to create a parallel set of processes right next to, again, that infrastructure that is working and making you money. So you take a new product or a new feature or a new piece of logic that you want to start working with, and you put that into a container right next to your monolith that you've already had, working with a lot of your security procedures around that container, so that you're not completely remaking your organization. You are simply adding a very small piece to that organization.
That makes absolute sense. And a large part of this, again, it comes back to that decoupling piece, right? Finding those user stories that are easy to peel off and business functional cases that they can take that full business process and find a way to peel it off and turn it into its own container stack and solution.
A great option is internal services, something that isn't necessarily making you money, but it gives you insights and able to identify different success goals inside. And you just want a visualization, just something straightforward, something beautiful, something that works. Create a container for that visualization, those graphs, that data, and no one is going to no one's going to miss it on your client side, and your money's not going to stop coming in. You're simply going to see how your business is doing elsewhere through this other parallel infrastructure.
I like that because a large part of this can be how to add in new services and features and functions without really affecting your core product. And that can be one of the core use cases for it. But one of the big pieces that people tend to run into when they try to do this is the data structures end up becoming a little bit different, right? How you manage the data behind all these applications, especially when you start doing containerization.
Yeah, there is, once you have a container, once you have an application off to the side, it is important to go back in, talk about your data structure. Where is your data located? Is it the best solution for your data, or was it the solution for your data that you had at that time? Containers can also help take over that data. Some of that data processing, some of that data transfer, some of that data needs to move kind of from your old infrastructure into your new infrastructure. And with containers, you are able to piece by piece select out the data that you want and need for your business going forward and separate it from the data and the old things that you don't maybe need anymore, or you just need for archival processes. And you can create containers in business logic that take that data and start to move it and store it in your modern era infrastructure.
Absolutely. And actually, another one that you just hit on there that I love this use case for containers, and I've heard about it a few different places now, is the idea of processing data with containers, right? One of the big pieces that I've seen before, or at least talked about before, was the idea that you can scale up that processing architecture and scale it down when it's needed. Can you give us like a kind of a story or a use case that you've run into before on that?
Well, there's an excellent possibility of if you do need to migrate data, you don't necessarily need to migrate data all of the time. Maybe you need to do it once a week. Maybe you need to do it once a month. And maybe you have a small container of logic that is copying and pasting things from one database to another. And maybe you don't want to do that with a single command. You can start to do that with multiple commands. And you don't want to run that infrastructure 24 hours a day. You want to run that infrastructure for just 5 or 6 hours, migrate that data over, shut down those containers afterwards, and you've just saved yourself tons of money, tons of infrastructure. And as security goes, you've shrunk your attack surface from significant pieces of hardware that you're running 24/7 that you need to security patch to small independent pieces of logic and infrastructure that are spun up, spun down, and they never bother you again. And with those pieces, you can go back in, make sure that they've been QA tested and secured before they ever make it into your infrastructure.
So it's really about not just enabling the idea of processing, but speeding up the way that you can process it, speeding up the processing time itself, and on top of that, increasing your security footprint because you're constantly looking at the infrastructure and it's constantly being redeployed whenever it's needed.
Having the option to run your business logic on any piece of hardware at any time lets you choose the most secure hardware, lets you choose the most secure infrastructure, lets you create the newest passwords, the newest security keys, the fewest ports available on all of that. It really gives you far more granular, containerized control over your infrastructure than you were ever going to get on big pieces of hardware, even on just direct virtualization where you're creating basically just a server on a server. Containers let you be far more granular. with all of those problems.
So if I was going to kind of distill this entire thing down a bit, right? And if I was going to try to do like a, let's call it 5 or 10 step process, right?
Yep.
What are the steps that organizations can go through to start getting into containerization?
First, they have to identify a piece of their organization that's ready for modernization. And then they have to go through the thought process of choosing what kind of modernization that they can do. So they have to look at their internal resources and say, we don't really have a guy who knows how to do things like Lambda functions, who isn't maybe ready for serverless. But on an intermediate step there, we're able to carve off this piece of business logic, this thing that we want to create, something greenfield is preferred, and you're able to, with low expense, low commitment, and easy access to hardware. All of these tools are open source and license free and all of that. You're able to start spinning up pieces of logic. And it can start with small, again, data transfer logic. Then it can create data transfer logic. You set up your next piece and you get data transfer into an area and then visualization of some of that data. And then maybe access and expandability of, if you have one person looking at this data, you can have one container. If you have 15 people looking at this data, maybe you need 15 containers spun up, visualizing and editing that data in that database. And once you've found that it's worked and you've gained confidence over your infrastructure, over your approach with this first candidate, you can start to move on to your other business processes. You start to look at creating version 2.0 of whatever your business money is coming from. And you start to look at, how do we carve off piece by piece of the monolith, the big scary monolith. It's been created over time.
So realistically, the approach would typically be identify a good business process, find a way to do the data transfer or data processing sections first, then look at visualization and analytics. And ideally from there, you can go anywhere. You can go into, application actual integrations, to more visualizations, to deeper and probably more robust analytics layers.
Containers are great at serving out information, great at serving out pieces of code, great at taking things that are on your back end and you want other people to have access to that data. And many or few containers give you the ability to expand out horizontally and create access paths to the right data securely and safely.
So if we're going to do like a top 5 reasons to use containers, it would be,
I would say number 1 is your ability to test and create that business logic from small areas where you're secure and you're able to develop smartly. I would say number 2 is you are able to spin up and spin down and create an expandable and shrinkable infrastructure that lets you answer your business case. If you have a slow period during the year, you can create very small containers, very small footprint. If you are looking at high points, you can create many containers and answer that load quickly and great ability to expand. The ability to skunkworks and take an opportunity to develop something that may or may not work, may or may not have a business case, may or may not work out in the end. You have the ability to create very small, secure pieces of infrastructure, so you're not, going to wake up anybody in the middle of the night over some of those fears about security. But you've created a small, secure infrastructure where you can spin up, spin down business logic and see if it's necessary. See if you need that, rather than large purchase, sums of servers, significant overhead, adding engineers and all of that. You can just run it very smallly and concisely. And then if it's got any value and if you should go to market.
Very cool. So, I mean, even the top 3 there right away is speed to market. You can get out there really fast and do something neat. Scalability, ability to kind of ramp up and ramp down as you need. And then I think I started really basically the idea of rapid prototyping.
Rapid prototyping, absolutely. You are able to test things out and small iterations upon that thing. Maybe the first idea was good, but if you want to iterate to great, containers are a great way to do that.
Definitely. I can see that. I mean, realistically, it's one of those things where you can just kind of sit down and load up a couple of containers and then start going, okay, well, I'm going to spin off like this little ETL process, do some data transfer and see if it even works before I go back up and start trying to do some analytics or what have you. So, and when it doesn't, you can quickly pivot to some new ideas without too much additional work. So, any last thoughts? I'll kind of leave this part open, right? We're talking about app modernization, right? So, the big thing here is how do we help organizations and how do organizations take that first step? So,
it's again identifying a piece of your infrastructure that you really want to, it is safe to move forward. You don't want to start off with app modernization by taking the biggest, most financially risky approach to this. You want to take something that's low financial risk, that's probably internal, probably not client facing, and is just is going to end up at the end of the day a small success, but it has become successful in education for your internal resources, becomes educational for your financial resources to see what app modernization will cost in the end, and that cost scales appropriately to usage.
so
And
one of
that education starts to grow.
absolutely, and one of the big pieces that I think you're kind of nailing there is just the idea of small, achievable results, right?
Yes.
Don't try to do the big bang. That these monolithic applications don't have to be lifted up and converted in their entirety in a week. You can
Right.
peel pieces.
The app modernization journey is a long one, and it is supposed to be. It's supposed to be secure and scalable, and it's supposed to take a long time because you're doing it the right way. You don't want to try to rush these things out and end up recreating a monolith or recreating problems that you had just created in your infrastructure in your version 1.0. There's going to be problems in that area. You want to try to solve those problems with app modernization, not recreate those problems with app modernization.
Always kind of have that iterative approach. Make sure that that version one's efficient, and you can always come back and change things for the future. All right. So as we're talking about app modernization, and these projects are never small, right? How do you define success? How do you get to a point where you can say, this is the end, this is the goal, this is what we really wanted to achieve?
With containerization and app modernization, you are going to want to try to set up several different layers of success and goals. You are going to want to start with small goals and small successes so that you can then grow those goals, those successes into larger and larger goals. You're going to small. You're going to. It's a growth opportunity when you create containerization of a piece of business logic. You get to grow it both technically out horizontally and with use case, but you're also able to grow that education and that usage out into the rest of your organization. Hey, containerization has worked really well for this small piece. We think that it would be successful to also work on your problems and work on these other problems as well. And I would say success with app modernization is you have created such a well-defined process and structure that it doesn't just work for your problem, it will work for other problems in your business.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the key areas, right? Is this isn't just about technology improvement. It's also about skilling up the employees and your staff to understand that there's different ways of doing things beyond the legacy approach.
That legacy approach is going to be you purchase a large server or you purchase a significant piece of infrastructure, and then you kind of throw your systems administrators at it to secure it and whatnot. And you have processes around those things. But what containerization lets you do is give the code and the business logic and the application back to developers and back to operators whose job now it is to build very small things and iterate on those things with far greater ease than you are ever going to find with that legacy process.
Increasing the agility of the team and giving them the skills to be able to respond to business needs and to pivot when, changing economic structures or business requirements or even just client requirements come up is going to be crucial as you're going through the process, right?
An important thing that we have just learned about is business can change during global crises. They can create and shrink need very quickly. And containerization, if your company is educated and ready to do containerization, they are able to expand and shrink as necessary, as global crises come and go.
Yeah, hopefully we don't have any additional ones.
Yeah, we're good on the one right now. Yes.
Very
We
cool.
don't need to parallelize the crises. Parallelize the solutions. Don't parallelize the crises.
That speaks into actually all the projects too, right? Actually, maybe we can talk a little bit on that real quick.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, just project approach with containerization. One of the great parts about it is that it gives you the ability to really parallelize your approach and your development cycles, right? You can split your teams a little bit easier.
If you have created what is hopefully a very agile, very fast, very quick moving, solution-based project management area around containers, that you're using this technology to move fast and be agile and problem solve quickly, you're going to make a splash in any organization that you're in. You're going to show people that you've been able to do things quicker and better and more iteratively than anybody else has done before. People are going to want to find out how you've done that. People are going to want to understand that approach, since it's going better than what they had the legacy approach that they had been using. So yeah, success is easier to find when you're iterating, and it is harder to find when you have 6-month-long cycles of purchasing hardware, securing hardware, networking hardware, and all of those legacy needs, versus a container that can be spun up locally on your machine, on old infrastructure, on new infrastructure, in any of those locations that you need it to exist in.
And a big part that it really helps you with too is that rapid prototyping. Going back to that again, right, gives you that ability to very quickly see where the holes in that development process are and where other integrations are going to be needed, or even just pushing out like an update for a patch gives you that ability to quickly evaluate whether or not it's going to be successful.
You have the ability inside of a couple of weeks, inside of a Windows server, security patch cycle, you have the ability to then create infrastructure, create an application, create a test case for an application inside the amount of time it's going to take you to patch your old infrastructure. Inside the amount of time Windows will need an update, you would be able to spin up an infrastructure, spin up containers, see where that business logic can go, and spin it back down again if it's unnecessary, versus the old way of doing it, which you wouldn't even have the computer secured in the amount of time.
And I guess that's the real key too, is even if we're talking about a brand new project to containerize a piece of business logic, you can do this really fast. We're talking weeks, not months.
And with how the world moves now, you have to do things in weeks. You have to be answering problems in weeks. You have to be saying, yes, I can do that in weeks. Doing those things in months, you'll lose clients, you'll lose staff, you'll lose all sorts of things. You'll lose the opportunity if it's still taking you months to create infrastructure, when containers can really start solving problems inside.